was the town tramp, but I didn't know what that meant. This woman had the yellow peroxide hair, she had the red nails, the red lipstick, the beautiful eyes, the high heels, short skirt, and I thought she was the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And whoever I was with said, oh, she ain't nothing but trash.
For over 6 decades, Dolly Parton has lived under the brightest spotlights in the world, sharing almost every detail of her glamorous life with millions of adoring fans. Yet, standing just a few feet outside the camera's reach was Judy Ogle, her childhood confidant who took a solemn vow never to utter a single word to the press. But following a devastating, quiet tragedy behind the gates of Dolly's private world, that 70-year wall of silence has officially shattered. What Judy has just brought into the light isn't just grief. It is a confession that completely redefines everything we thought we knew about country music's greatest icon. When you think of Dolly Parton, your mind immediately floods with images: the towering wigs, the glittering rhinestones, the dazzling smile that has graced magazine covers, movie screens, and concert stages for more than half a century. She is, without question, one of the most photographed, most interviewed, and most beloved women in the entire history of American entertainment. And yet, if you were to go back through every single interview Dolly has ever given, and trust me, there are thousands, you would notice something strange. Something almost eerie when you start to pay attention. There is almost always someone standing just out of frame. Not a bodyguard, not a manager, not a publicist or a makeup artist. A quiet woman in simple clothes, standing a few feet behind the chaos, watching everything with calm, knowing eyes. That woman is Judy Ogle. And for the better part of 70 years, she has been the single most important person in Dolly Parton's life that the world has been told absolutely nothing about. Now, let that sink in for a moment. We are talking about a woman who has been by Dolly's side since they were both little girls running barefoot through the red clay hills of Sevierville, Tennessee. A woman who has traveled to every corner of the globe with her. A woman who has slept in the same hotel rooms, ridden in the same tour buses, and sat in the same hospital waiting rooms during some of the most terrifying moments of Dolly's life. And yet, if you were to walk up to the average Dolly Parton fan on the street and ask them who Judy Ogle is, most of them would stare at you blankly. And that was not an accident. That was by design. You see, Dolly Parton built her entire public persona around the idea of radical transparency. She jokes about her appearance. She talks openly about growing up in poverty. She shares her faith, her songwriting process, and her love for her husband Carl Dean with a warmth that makes millions of people feel like they genuinely know her. But behind that carefully crafted openness is a fortress with walls so thick and so impenetrable that even the most aggressive tabloid journalists in Hollywood have never been able to crack it. And the person holding the keys to that fortress has always been Judy. Judy was never interested in fame. She turned down reality television offers. She refused to write a tell-all memoir, even when publishers reportedly dangled 7-figure checks in front of her. She didn't want a spotlight. She didn't want a brand deal. She wanted to protect the one person she loved more than anything else in this world. And for decades, that protection worked flawlessly. The media respected the boundary. The fans accepted the mystery. And Dolly continued to shine brighter than ever, safe in the knowledge that her most private truths were locked away in the one vault no reporter could ever access. But here is the thing about vaults. They are built to keep things in. And sometimes, the things locked inside become too heavy for one person to carry alone. In the weeks following a quiet, devastating event that shook the Parton inner circle to its very core, sources close to the family began whispering that Judy had been seen in a state the world had never witnessed before. Not the composed, steady presence fans occasionally glimpsed in rare photographs. This was something different. Something raw. Something that suggested the weight of 7 decades of silence had finally become unbearable. And then, without warning, Judy did the one thing everyone in the entertainment industry swore she would never do. She opened her mouth. But before we get to the words that sent shockwaves through Nashville and beyond, we need to understand exactly what Judy was protecting all those years. Because the silence she maintained wasn't just about keeping the paparazzi at bay. It was about guarding a specific, deeply personal secret that Dolly herself was terrified would destroy everything she had built. A secret that traces all the way back to a tiny classroom in the Smoky Mountains in the mid-1950s, when two little girls made a promise that would bind them together for the rest of their lives. And that promise is far more complicated and far more heartbreaking than anyone ever imagined. To truly understand the magnitude of what Judy Ogle just revealed, you have to rewind the clock all the way back to 1955. Sevierville, Tennessee. A one-room schoolhouse where the desks were scratched, the chalkboards were cracked, and the children of coal miners and sharecroppers sat shoulder to shoulder dreaming of lives bigger than the mountains that surrounded them. It was in that tiny, dusty classroom that 9-year-old Dolly Parton first locked eyes with a girl named Judy Ogle, and something clicked between them that neither of them could explain then and neither of them has been able to shake since. Dolly was already different. Even at that age, she carried herself with a kind of electric confidence that made other kids either gravitate toward her or pull away in confusion. She sang during recess. She wrote little songs on scraps of notebook paper. She told anyone who would listen that one day the entire world was going to know her name. Most of the kids laughed. Judy didn't. Judy listened. And more importantly, Judy believed her. From that moment forward, the two became inseparable. They walked to school together. They shared lunches. They whispered secrets under blankets during sleepovers while the Tennessee crickets hummed outside the window. And it was during one of those quiet, candlelit nights that they made a pact. A solemn, pinky-sworn promise that whatever happened in their lives, no matter how famous or how far apart the world tried to pull them, they would never betray each other's trust. Not to the press. Not to their families. Not to anyone. Fast forward to the late 1960s. Dolly's career is exploding. She's on national television. She's recording hit after hit. The spotlight is blinding, and the machinery of fame is starting to chew up everyone around her. Managers come and go. Friends from Nashville start asking for favors. Relatives she barely remembers suddenly show up at her doorstep asking for money. The noise is deafening, and in the middle of that chaos, Dolly makes a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She calls Judy. Judy packed her bags, left Tennessee, and moved to Nashville to become Dolly's personal assistant, confidant, and, most critically, her human shield. From that point on, Judy controlled who got access to Dolly and who didn't. If a journalist wanted an interview, they went through Judy. If a Hollywood producer wanted a meeting, they went through Judy. If a so-called close friend from Dolly's past suddenly wanted to reconnect after 20 years of silence, Judy was the one who quietly shut the door, and the offers to break that silence were staggering. We're talking about multiple publishing houses reportedly offering Judy millions of dollars for a tell-all memoir. Television networks pitching exclusive documentary deals. Even Oprah's team allegedly reached out at one point, hoping to sit Judy down for a sit-down that would have shattered ratings records. Judy said no to every single one of them. Not a hesitant no. Not a let me think about it no. A firm, unwavering, absolutely not no. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. Industry insiders who worked closely with the Parton camp over the decades have quietly suggested that Judy's silence was never just about protecting Dolly's everyday privacy. It was about guarding something far more specific. Something Dolly herself reportedly described in private moments as the one truth that, if it ever leaked, would shatter the wholesome, family-friendly image she had spent her entire career building brick by brick. What was that truth? For years, the tabloids speculated wildly. Was it about her marriage? Her health? Her finances? Her faith? The rumors swirled endlessly, but Judy's wall never cracked. Not once. Not even when the pressure became almost suffocating. And that pressure was about to get significantly worse, because lurking just beneath the surface of Dolly's seemingly perfect public life was a relationship dynamic that the tabloids had been obsessing over for decades. A tangled, complicated triangle involving Dolly, Judy, and the most mysterious husband in all of Hollywood. And what really happened behind the closed doors of that marriage is something that will completely reframe everything you thought you knew. If there is one topic that has driven celebrity tabloids absolutely insane for the better part of 5 decades, it is the mystery of Carl Dean. Dolly Parton's husband is, without exaggeration, the most elusive spouse in the entire entertainment industry. The man has been photographed by the paparazzi maybe a handful of times since the 1970s. He has never walked a red carpet. He has never given a single interview. He reportedly hasn't even attended most of Dolly's award ceremonies. And yet, Dolly insists, with absolute sincerity every time she's asked, that their marriage is the happiest, most stable relationship in her life. Now, the public ate that up for a while. Fans loved the fairy tale. The small-town girl who married her high school sweetheart and stayed faithful through the madness of global superstardom. It was a beautiful narrative. But behind the scenes, the tabloids were spinning a very different story, and at the center of that story was Judy Ogle. For years, the gossip columns whispered that Dolly and Judy's relationship was far more than a childhood friendship. The speculation was relentless. Why did Judy live so close to Dolly? Why did they travel everywhere together? Why did Judy have more access to Dolly's private life than Carl apparently did? The questions piled up, and the tabloids ran with them, printing increasingly sensational headlines that painted Judy as everything from a secret romantic partner to a controlling gatekeeper who had deliberately pushed Carl to the margins of Dolly's life. Dolly, for her part, handled the rumors with her signature grace and humor. She'd laugh on talk shows, crack a joke about how Judy was the real love of her life, and then move on to the next question. And the audience would laugh along, assuming it was all just Dolly being Dolly. Playful, self-aware, unbothered. But what the cameras didn't capture was the toll those rumors took behind closed doors. Sources who were part of Dolly's inner circle during the late 1970s and early 1980s have described a period of intense emotional strain that the public never saw. The constant speculation wasn't just annoying, it was corrosive. It created friction within the household. It put pressure on Carl, who was already a deeply private man, to retreat even further from the public eye. And it placed an enormous burden on Judy, who found herself in the impossible position of being simultaneously accused of destroying Dolly's marriage, while also being the only person keeping Dolly emotionally functional during the most grueling years of her career. And this is where the story gets truly fascinating, because what emerged from that pressure was not a breakdown of the triangle, but rather an extraordinary, unspoken arrangement between Carl and Judy that most people outside the inner circle still don't fully understand. According to those close to the family, Carl and Judy reached a quiet understanding early on. Carl knew he could never be the person Dolly needed on the road, in the studio, or in the whirlwind of Hollywood. He didn't want that life. He wanted his asphalt business, his quiet mornings, and his privacy. Judy, on the other hand, was willing to step into the storm. So rather than competing for Dolly's attention, Carl and Judy essentially divided the labor of loving her. Carl anchored Dolly to her roots, to home, to the quiet normalcy she desperately craved when the noise became too much. Judy anchored Dolly to her career, to her ambition, and to the relentless machine that demanded her presence every single day. It was an arrangement built on mutual respect and, surprisingly, deep affection between Carl and Judy themselves. They weren't rivals. They were co-guardians of the same fragile, extraordinary woman. And for a long time, the system worked beautifully. But no system is indestructible. And by the early 1980s, the cracks were starting to show. Not in the marriage and not in the friendship, but in Dolly herself. The pressure of fame, the physical toll of non-stop touring, and a series of devastating personal losses began to converge into a perfect storm that neither Carl's quiet stability nor Judy's fierce devotion could hold back. And what happened next inside the walls of Dolly's private world was so dark, so terrifying, that Judy reportedly locked the details away in her memory and swore she would never speak of them publicly. Until now. To the outside world, the early 1980s looked like the absolute pinnacle of Dolly Parton's empire. She was starring in blockbuster movies like 9 to 5, dominating both the pop and country charts, and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become Dollywood. She was practically printing money, loved by millions across the globe, and seemingly floating on an endless wave of charisma and rhinestone glory. But behind the scenes, away from the flashing lights and roaring crowds, Dolly Parton was quietly falling apart. Her body was failing her. Years of punishing tour schedules, terrible nutrition, and chronic stress had caught up all at once. She was diagnosed with severe bleeding ulcers and crippling endometriosis, which eventually led to a sudden emergency partial hysterectomy. For a woman who had spent years secretly hoping that one day she might have children of her own, the surgery was an emotional gut punch that completely shattered her spirit. Dolly sank into a clinical, suffocating depression. She withdrew into her home, refused to speak to management, stopped answering calls from close friends, and locked herself inside her private bedroom. Now, Dolly has occasionally spoken in past interviews about that harrowing period. She even admitted in her autobiography that there was a terrifying moment involving a gun on her nightstand, a moment where she stared down the darkest abyss of her life and nearly didn't make it back. But what the history books leave out, and what Dolly rarely elaborated on, is who was sitting on the other side of that locked bedroom door day after day, week after week. It was Judy. When everyone else in Dolly's life was frozen with panic, not knowing whether to call the doctors, the record label, or the press, Judy stepped in and took complete control. She physically blocked executives from entering the house. She handled the doctors quietly, ensuring no whisper of Dolly's true condition ever leaked to the tabloids. And when Dolly refused to leave that bed, Judy sat right outside that door in the hallway, speaking quietly through the wood, refusing to sleep until she heard Dolly's voice answer back. Judy didn't treat Dolly like a superstar or an international commodity. She treated her like the scared little girl from Sevierville she had promised to protect on a classroom playground 30 years earlier. Judy was the one who personally administered Dolly's medication, cooked her simple meals, and literally helped pull her back from the edge of oblivion. That experience changed their dynamic forever. Judy wasn't just a childhood friend or an executive assistant anymore. She was Dolly's lifeline, and the bond between them solidified into something unbreakable and entirely exclusive. As Dolly slowly rebuilt her health and staged one of the greatest career comebacks in modern music history, that ironclad loyalty came at a steep cost. Certain members of Dolly's extended family and old Nashville circle grew increasingly frustrated. They felt shut out. They felt like Judy had built an invisible wall around Dolly that no one else was allowed to penetrate. But Dolly didn't care about the complaints. She made it crystal clear to everyone on her payroll. Judy's word was final. What Judy decided was what Dolly decided. For the next 4 decades, that unyielding partnership carried Dolly through the highest highs of her legendary life. They navigated megatours, massive charity initiatives, and unprecedented cultural acclaim. Judy remained the constant, silent guardian standing just off camera, watching Dolly's back with the exact same watchful gaze. Together, they believed they had weathered every storm life could possibly throw at them. They had survived poverty, Hollywood cutthroats, brutal health crises, and relentless tabloid scrutiny. But as the years marched on and the two women crossed into their late 70s, a quiet, unavoidable shadow began creeping across the horizon. A reality that neither money, nor fame, nor 70 years of fierce loyalty could ever hold back. And when that devastating blow finally struck behind the closed gates of the Parton estate, it didn't just break Judy's heart. It set into motion a quiet, private chain of events that would ultimately force Judy to break the sacred vow she had kept for her entire life. If you paid close attention to Dolly Parton over the last few years, you probably noticed the subtle shifts. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. A scaled-back schedule here, a canceled appearance there. Then came the official announcement that sent shockwaves through the music industry. Dolly was officially retiring from full-scale touring. She told the press it was simply because she wanted to stay closer to home and spend more time with her husband, Carl. The world accepted that explanation without hesitation. After all, Dolly was in her late 70s. She had earned the right to sleep in her own bed and relax after 60 years of nonstop work. But behind the towering security gates of her Nashville estate, the real reason for that retreat was far more heartbreaking than anyone in the public realized. The private world Dolly and Judy had spent 7 decades building was beginning to experience devastating, irreversible losses. Over a relatively short span of time, Dolly had to say goodbye to some of the most foundational figures of her life. She lost her beloved brother Floyd in 2018. Then, her brother and longtime musical collaborator Randy passed away in 2021 after a grueling battle with cancer. Couple that with the advancing age and fragile health of her husband Carl Dean, and the once vibrant Parton compound had turned into a quiet sanctuary of grief for Judy. Watching the woman she had sworn to protect endure this wave of relentless sorrow was a unique kind of torture. Throughout their entire lives, Whenever Dolly was hurting, Judy was the one who fixed it. When Dolly was overworked, Judy cleared the calendar. When Dolly was hounded by reporters, Judy blocked the calls. When Dolly was physically broken in the 1980s, Judy nursed her back to health. But now, they were facing an enemy that neither Judy's fierce loyalty nor Dolly's boundless optimism could defeat: the unstoppable march of time. Those close to the Nashville estate reported that during this period of deep seclusion, a profound shift took place between the two women. They spent long afternoons sitting on the back porch, looking out over the rolling Tennessee hills, talking not about upcoming albums or business ventures, but about the past, and what would happen when one of them was no longer here. It was during one of these deeply private, emotional conversations that Dolly did something she had put off for decades. She walked over to a heavy, fireproof safe tucked away in the private quarters of her home. Inside was a series of sealed folders, handwritten journals, and master audio tapes that had never touched the airwaves, material spanning back to the very beginning of her career in the 1960s. Dolly turned to Judy, handed her the key, and gave her a set of explicit, unwavering instructions. Dolly told Judy that when the day finally came that the curtain permanently closed, Judy was the only person on earth authorized to decide what the public would see, and what would be destroyed forever. It was the ultimate sign of trust, but it was also a crushing burden. For 70 years, Judy had carried Dolly's secrets like a badge of honor. She had kept her mouth shut through media storms, scandalous headlines, and multi-million-dollar book offers. But looking at those sealed archives, and seeing the fragile, beautiful reality of the woman sitting across from her, something inside Judy began to fracture. Judy realized that the world loved Dolly Parton the caricature. The world loved the big wigs, the sharp one-liners, the dazzling costumes, and the endless smile. But the world didn't truly understand the immense pain, the quiet sacrifices, and the hidden heartbreaks that went into building that icon. And as rumors began to swirl in late 2023 that a major health scare had once again shaken the Parton inner circle behind closed doors, Judy reached a private breaking point. The 70-year silence was no longer acting as a shield. It was acting as an erasure of the real woman behind the myth. And so, without warning Dolly's publicists, managers, or record executives, Judy did the unthinkable. She broke the lifetime vow, and the first words that left her mouth sent absolute shockwaves across the entire country music world. When the silence finally broke, it didn't happen on an explosive television special or through a sensationalized Hollywood tabloid splash. That was never Judy Ogle's style. It happened quietly, deliberately, and with an emotional weight that immediately sent shockwaves rippling through the highest corridors of the Nashville music establishment. For 70 years, the music industry had treated Judy as a living vault. Record executives, producers, and biographers all operated under the assumption that whatever Judy knew, she would take directly to her grave. But when word began circulating among close family friends and longtime associates that Judy had finally chosen to speak, the reaction was nothing short of total disbelief. Judy wasn't looking to settle scores, and she certainly wasn't looking for fame or money. What she shared was an unvarnished, deeply moving confession about the real cost of being Dolly Parton. For the very first time, Judy pulled back the glittering rhinestone curtain that Dolly had spent 6 decades perfecting. She spoke about the staggering physical and emotional price Dolly paid behind closed doors just to keep the world smiling. Judy revealed how Dolly would frequently collapse backstage into absolute exhaustion, weeping from the sheer physical agony of chronic health battles, only to force herself back onto her feet seconds later because she refused to disappoint a single fan waiting in the arena. Judy described the profound, haunting loneliness that lived at the very top of Dolly's empire. She talked about the countless holidays spent in sterile hotel rooms, the quiet tears shed over the family life Dolly had to sacrifice, and the suffocating burden of carrying an entire billion-dollar brand on 2 fragile shoulders. "The world knows Dolly Parton the star," Judy reportedly conveyed in her deeply emotional account. "They love the laughter, the wigs, and the songs. But nobody knows how much she bled to give them that joy. Nobody knows the woman who sat in the dark when the cameras turned off." Hearing those words from anyone else might have sounded like classic celebrity dramatization. But coming from Judy Ogle, the woman who had refused multi-million-dollar tell-all contracts for half a century, the words carried the force of an absolute earthquake. For longtime fans, it was a gut punch. It forced millions of people to re-examine the woman they thought they knew inside and out. Dolly wasn't just an ageless, untouchable mountain angel who floated effortlessly through life. She was a deeply scarred, incredibly resilient human being who had traded her own private happiness so that the rest of the world could have an icon. However, as Judy's emotional disclosures began spreading beyond the inner circle, panic quickly set in among certain members of Dolly's management team and extended family. Because Judy hadn't just spoken about Dolly's past struggles and personal sacrifices, she had let something far more explosive slip into the light. During her reflections, Judy made direct reference to the private directives Dolly had recently handed down, specifically acknowledging the existence of the locked, fireproof vault containing Dolly's final, unreleased life archive. Judy openly admitted that Dolly had left behind specific instructions on how her true story was to be told once the music finally stopped playing forever. To the outside world, that sounded like a touching gesture between two lifelong friends. But to those inside Dolly's business empire, it was a five-alarm fire. Because within that vault wasn't just old tour memorabilia or sweet acoustic demos. It contained deeply personal letters, unedited recordings, and revelations that Dolly had spent 50 years keeping away from lawyers, record labels, and even her own relatives. And as the full scope of what was actually inside that vault began to emerge, the country music world realized that Dolly's greatest story wasn't written in the history books yet. It was sitting in a locked mountain safe, waiting for Judy Ogle to turn the key. Deep in the rolling foothills of the Great Smoky Mountains, far away from the blinding neon lights of Broadway in Nashville and the relentless paparazzi lenses of Los Angeles, sits the physical manifestation of Dolly Parton's most guarded truth. It isn't a museum exhibit. It isn't an attraction at Dollywood. It is a private, heavy steel archive known only to a tiny handful of people in Dolly's innermost circle. And Judy Ogle holds the only key. For decades, the public believed that Dolly Parton had already shared everything there was to know about her life. She wrote autobiographies. She gave thousands of candid interviews. She wrote over 3,000 songs that laid her soul bare for anyone with a radio. But behind that seemingly open book was a completely separate chapter that Dolly intentionally kept in the dark. A collection of audio recordings, handwritten letters, and personal diaries that span nearly 60 years of unbroken history. These aren't studio outtakes or polished corporate master tracks meant for future greatest hits box sets. According to those familiar with the archive's existence, these are raw, unvarnished acoustic tapes Dolly recorded in the dead of night when the world was asleep. Voice memos recorded into cassette tapes in lonely hotel rooms across Europe in the 1970s. Deeply personal, unsent letters addressed to family members, lovers, business rivals, and lifelong confidants. Intimate reflections detailing the exact emotional toll of her silent battles, her health scares, the immense sacrifices of her childless marriage, the true nature of her pact with Carl Dean, and the overwhelming weight of carrying the hopes of millions while starving for peace of her own. Dolly knew better than anyone how the entertainment industry worked. She watched Hollywood and Nashville chew up legends like Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and Whitney Houston, distorting their legacies and auctioning off their private lives the second they were gone. She knew that the moment she passed away, corporations, distant relatives, and predatory biographers would descend upon her estate to claim their piece of the pie. She refused to let that happen. And so, she placed her entire life's truth into the hands of the only human being who had never asked her for a single penny, Judy. Dolly's instructions to Judy were simple, terrifying, and absolute. The vault was marked with a strict, unbreakable directive, to be opened only when the music stops. Dolly gave Judy total, unilateral legal authority to decide the fate of those archives. Judy has the power to release them, to seal them in a time capsule, or to feed them into an incinerator so that the world will never hear them. Now that Judy has stepped forward and shattered her 70-year silence, the world is forced to look at Dolly Parton through a completely different, profoundly moving lens. We can no longer look at the towering blonde wigs, the glittering rhinestone jackets, and the warm mountain smile as mere entertainment. We have to see them for what they truly were: armor. Armor worn by an extraordinary, vulnerable woman who gave every single drop of her life to the world, while Judy stood quietly in the shadows holding her together. Judy didn't break her silence out of weakness, and she certainly didn't do it for attention. She spoke out to ensure that when history finally writes the definitive story of Dolly Parton, it doesn't just remember a caricature or a commercial brand. It remembers the real woman who fought through unthinkable darkness to bring light into millions of lives. Yet, despite Judy's extraordinary emotional confession, the biggest question of all still hangs heavily over the Tennessee mountains. Because insiders reveal that deep inside that locked vault sits one specific, sealed cassette tape, recorded by Dolly in complete isolation just before she withdrew from public life, marked with Judy's name and a warning label that forbids it from ever being destroyed. What did Dolly confess into that microphone in her final, quiet moments of seclusion? And what is the one truth hidden on that tape that Judy Ogle admits will forever change how the world remembers country music's greatest queen? Only time will tell. But until that key finally turns, the true story of Dolly Parton remains safely guarded in the heart of the one woman who loved her enough to keep her secrets until the very end. Reveals the existence of Dolly's personal, sealed archives entrusted exclusively to Judy, containing unreleased recordings, deeply personal letters, and instructions meant only for a post-life world. As Judy steps into the light to fulfill her final sacred duty, the world is forced to look at Dolly Parton through an entirely new, heart-wrenching lens. Yet, one unanswered question remains about what Judy chose to keep hidden inside that vault, and why she refuses to let it be destroyed.